Water in Communications is a special program that's been developed together with the Grundfos Foundation, and we will be focusing throughout the program and the workshop on the theme of World Water Week, Seeds of Change, Innovative Solutions for a Water-Wise World. And before we start, we also have, I also have a message from Marissa, who is wanting to present and invite you to join a LinkedIn group called Communications, Water and Communications. Marissa is a communication and educational strategist from Mexico, and she's going to post the link in the chat, and you are more than welcome to join that and then keep on conversing and discussing water and communications. Right, I think it's time for us now to invite our very first speaker, Andreas Malmos, Senior Manager, Partnership Communications, Plan International, Denmark. Welcome. And we're going to talk about photos. A lot of the time in this workshop, we've been talking about communicating with text or with audio. And this time we're going to move on and do the pictures. So we're going to talk a little bit about ethical challenges with photos and videos. And still, I want to start with this exhibition or the project that you have commissioned a Danish photographer to do, Daniel Rye. It's also going to be a show, an exhibition about life in rural Togo. And perhaps you can start telling us about the project and why you decided to launch such a project.
Sure, I can do that. Well, just a bit of background. Like Plan Denmark and Plan International Togo, we have worked with water and sanitation for several years in rural Togo, with the support from Grundfos Foundation. And it's about locating, finding water resources, using technology to give people access to clean drinking water through solar-powered water pumps, and working with communities, water committees, authorities to ensure maintenance, fair distribution, and etc. And now it's actually 80,000 people who have gotten sustainable access to clean drinking water in 21 villages. So a huge effect on waterborne diseases, health in general, sanitation, and like for women, for instance, who doesn't have to go many kilometers to find water and spend a lot of time treating it, and also children who do not have to do that work but can attend school. So like a really good story and a good result. And so we wanted to do two things. In Denmark, not a lot of people or the media talk about this huge water issue that the world is facing. So we wanted to show that, how lack of clean water and the scope of the issue and how it affects people, but also, and very importantly, take a constructive approach to say that, well, there are actually solutions that can work and has worked. So if there is political will or whatever, there's actually things you can do to mitigate this. And that's what we wanted to show. So we wanted to show how a lot of people in these areas were actually set free by their own account and because they have worked very hard to it. And we wanted to show that that's another side of it than just the issues. So now, and Daniel, he's a photographer, but for us, this is not only an exhibition. Daniel, he is first of all, actually, he's known for something that is not very positive. He was actually held captured by the IS in 2014 for 14 months, and there's a book about it and a movie and all that. But since then, he has worked a lot with climate change and water issues. He did a photo book on where he followed a family in Malawi who was sort of waiting for the floods to come in. So he's really taken an interest in this. And because of this experience, he does a lot of lectures, and that's what he's known for in Denmark, that people pay to listen to him. And that's the agreement that we made with him, that that after this photo exhibition should travel with him and myself to make people listen and understand it, because that's what he's really good at. So it's both photos, but it's also different types of communication.
Yeah, right. And will the exhibition be traveling in Denmark only, or in Scandinavia, or maybe in Europe, or broader?
For now, it's only Denmark. But if anybody on the call wants it, please reach out. We are sort of launching it, or we are launching it today at a Danish people meeting, where on an island here in Denmark, where all politicians, decision makers, and also completely ordinary people are coming and discussing policy and politics, and that's where we're actually launching it with an event where Daniel is speaking.
So and how has he been working in Togo? I mean, has he spent a lot of time there? Did you prepare for the people that he met so that they knew he was coming, or did he spend maybe months there? How did you do it in practical terms?
Actually, spending months there would be the right way to do it. That was not possible for us. But what we did in terms of preparation was that we held a lot of meetings with Plan Togo. We had a lot of meetings with WASH experts, also with experts from the university in Lomé in Togo, but also University of Copenhagen, to really understand the issues around WASH, and of course also to understand the local context. But you can only understand so much from Teams calls, of course. So it was also important that we were not too firm on what we wanted to do once we got there. And that's also why we chose Dan, because he knows this. He knows that before he can take a single photo, there's a lot of people that we need to talk to while we are there. And that's what we did. We did the research. We made sure that he understood the challenges and also the project. So we only spent 10 days there, but everything we did and all photos and all stories has been through a review by our country office, Plan Togo.
Right. And I mean, of course, it's important to get the right message out there. And we talk about photos and videos. How would you describe them in your communication work? I mean, how important is it to accompany text or facts with photos and videos, you think?
It's pivotal, I would say, that we can do that. Our target groups are our members, people who support us every month, but we also need to be able to show what we do and attract new givers, and that's, for Plan Denmark at least, that's mainly Danish people who have never traveled on the continent. So yes, we need the images. They're very important in order for people to understand what we do. Yes.
And what are the greatest challenges and with using photos? And I mean, it's quite interesting with photos because they can underline a stereotype or a preconceived idea about a country or a people, but it can also totally change that preconceived idea and show a different reality? How do you work around these challenges?
That's exactly right. I think that we as an NGO are very, very, I mean, for all NGOs, you all remember maybe the 80s and Live Aid, and we still have commercials where we don't, but it's still out there of children who are severely malnourished or with big stomachs and you know, images of the continent that it's not nuanced, and that's a responsibility that we have as NGOs to show it in a different light. For us, it's very, very important that whenever we do stories on our social media, whatever, the people who speak are the people that are actually in the image. We're not talking for them, but we are providing a platform. And there is always strict consent. We also have many rules on, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But for photos, when we travel and do photography, there are ways of taking a photo that we do not do. People have to be closed. We don't want to enhance the issues. We want to show it as it is and provide the context.
So can you give some examples of these rules or the code of conduct that we got, and what would you not do? And then we look at what you have done. All right.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, first of all, we make sure that we spend some time talking to whoever it is that we are photographing, and we make them understand what the use is for, why we're doing it. But for instance, if it's, I mean, in my experience, sometimes when I have seen photographers who are less experienced in taking photos in a continent that they know very little of, they quickly go to what is you know, the most, they want to take photos of what is strongest, and by that sometimes it's the most dire situation. So like a child with very worn out clothes, or something that come across as really horrific or whatever, and that we don't do that because it's not covering the situation, that community necessarily. So we don't show a child without clothes on its upper body, for instance, because that child doesn't have a say in that, and that's very important. We make sure not to, for instance, take photos from up and down on people, and again, we need the consent, and we need to look at the photos afterwards always. And we also, when we have a person who we take photos of, we make sure to show them the photos right after, so they also are included in the decision, just as I would do if I took a photo of you. And it's just important to respect people's space and do it as we would do it here in Denmark. And if it's children, get the parents involved, get their consent. So there's a lot of things that we do, and a lot of things that shouldn't be done. Yeah, let me show some of the things that we did. Just sharing my screen. Yes. Yeah. I hope this is.
We can see your screen, no problems.
Good. So this is Daniel, for you to see him. okay, here is a woman, for instance, and that's maybe an example of how we try to understand the issue before we take a photo. The most important part for us in this was to show actually the good part, the constructive part on how things have actually changed and how these people are really driving change themselves. However, you also have to show the situation as was before, or as it is where people do not have access to clean water. So we went to a place where the project is not implemented, and we met this woman Java, and we spent many hours with her before we actually took any photos of her. And what she does is that she spends hours going and collecting water. So we waited to she was going to do that anyway. When she gets home, she uses a lot of time treating that water, and that water is coming from this river, and is of course not clean. And when she gets this water home, she spends a lot of time treating it, cleaning it in various ways, and it makes up 5 hours every day for her that she could spend on a lot of other things. So this is one photo in others where we want to show not just that she's that she has to use this dirty water, but actually the whole process and the time that is taken away from her that she could have spent on other things, because that's the important issue for her. Yes, the health issues is very important too, but there's more to it. So we took a series of photos here. She's collecting, but for me, this is a photo that shows a lot of strength, and that she's fighting. And we also have other photos with her that should demonstrate that. And here is she's doing the process. And again, that's important for Daniel as well. So all his photos are accompanied with more than just one. So we're telling a story in each case. And yes, I want to show this one. This is a lady who her role is actually as part of the project in a community she's sort of in charge of one of these solar powered water pumps and collecting payment from the other villages. And she was a bit worried because at the time when we came, the water pump was not working properly. It was not her fault, but that's how she felt it was. But we had a conversation with her, and this photo is one in a series, but we talked about her. She was happy about this role she had. She was esteemed member of the community. She had an important role. But it also, and she had an income, but it also gave her, she worried about it because she felt it was her responsibility. And she was asked to look worried. And this can maybe seem staged, but we showed her the photo and said, how do you think about that? What do you think about this? And she loved it. And personally, I think that's it's a beautiful photo. Yeah, so just a few examples on how we worked with it.
And you mentioned before Live Aid and as an example from the 80s. I remember other pictures from the famine in Ethiopia with the vulture and the child. A lot of us who have been in the field quite for some time remember that picture and the discussions after it. Do you think that the discussions and the debate and the talk around the use of photos in a more respectful and ethical way, has it evolved? Has it developed? Are we getting somewhere? Is it changing?
Yes, I believe it is. I just have to say that, well, I was not born in the 80s actually, so so
I was.
I'm referring to something that I didn't experience myself, but of course I know about this, and yes, I think change is happening, and it is also a dilemma because organizations need to fundraise, they need to demonstrate urgency, and but I believe there are better ways to do that than these images and like the one the example you just came with here. You know, but I see, you know, I see a lot of things are moving. I saw, for instance, Doctors Without Borders, who and I want to actually praise them because they have really taken it up and said, we know that for a long time we have put, it's always white people in front in their communication. It was always white doctors or nurses who helped out. But that's not the reality. There are doctors and nurses from all around the world who are doing, who are actually doing their work. And they said, well, we did that in the past, but now, and we know that was wrong. And now we want to ensure proper representation. And that's also something that is important to us. So I can sense that people receive it well when we, for instance, we actually want to make sure that someone like me can travel less for communication content, and actually we are trying to equip a lot of the beneficiaries, young people that we work with, to actually become mobile journalists, as we call them, someone who can do the stories themselves. They receive training in that, so they can actually provide content with pay that is professional enough to be used in a global context for fundraising and for a lot of purposes.
Right, thank you. I think that's at least part of an answer to Lorna's question here. Do you engage local filmmakers and photographers to capture images and photos? Do you want to add anything more to that, or than what you just said?
Yes, we do. And if it's possible, I would always prefer to work with a local photographer, but we are really pushing this agenda also internally in Plan International, that we equip and the young people that we work with to do the communication. However, the reason why we chose Daniel is that in order for us to reach people here in Denmark, we need someone who, in this case, who is well known, that people want to listen to, that people want to come and listen to our event. But I think there are many things that we could do more of, and also in this project, maybe that we could include more voices from Togo.
So it's a little bit case by case decision on who you're commissioning. Michael has a question. Does Plan also have a model contract or similar that is signed by the people portrayed in the pictures? And how is it with GDPR-ish setup? Those are two questions, if you can take on the two.
Yes, yes. Everybody who's we take photos of, or who anyway are depicted, they are signing a consent form. If they're under 18, their parents will do it. Also, depending on the local context, of course, if the parents has to sign off, if they are older than 18. GDPR wise, the same rule applies for everyone as they do here. So sharing of privileged information, that's of course a no-go. Depending on the age, we are never you know, in the images you cannot. It's important that you cannot locate where a child is from. Sometimes, or we don't use last names. Sometimes we have to, depending on the situation, the context, we maybe change names, and of course inform about that. But we are advised and solely rely on advice from our colleagues, local colleagues, about this.
All right. Afia has also added here the name that escaped me when I mentioned the vulture and the child. It's Kevin Carter, who was the photographer, and he was part of a South African group of photographers who traveled a lot throughout the continent in Africa in the 80s. Ryan has he has written here, the Pledge for Change. That's a good description of telling stories in this context, and there is also a link to Pledge for Change. That could be a nice piece to look up for all of you interested in this kind of topics. Lorna says, well, that was the local filmmakers, we've done that. Afia says, what is the geographical extent of the photographic? How does one become part of the initiative to highlight issues in our areas? Can you explain a little bit, Afia, our areas, whereabout are we? You maybe write some more explanation to that question. There we go, see here. I mean, issues in my country, Pakistan. Afia is in Pakistan. So would you have any initiative, I guess, similar initiative maybe in Pakistan, or would that be something that you could consider in the future?
Unfortunately, Plan is not present in Pakistan anymore. We used to be, but if we were, I am sure this would be this definitely be something that we would look into. You're referring to the initiative about the mobile journalists that I talked to before, or this cooperation with Daniel?
He's writing.
Yeah. Okay.
So while Afia is writing, we will take that up. I just want to talk to you also. Yes, the mobile journalists. Exactly.
Yeah, but it's something we hope to roll out in all 55 countries that where Plan has programs, but it takes time. And a lot of the countries they are starting themselves without someone like me suggesting it. So
that's great. That's great. That's great. Journalism and media, and I mean, you have now a set of rules, a code of conduct, how to take photos, how not to take photos as well. What do you think about journalism and media? I myself is a journalist. That's my background. Do we need to change our set of conduct, our code of conduct and our rules? Or is the media all right these days, you think? What do you see in the papers and the newspapers?
Well, first of all, I would like to see more from the world that we work in. So I think there are some editorial decisions that of course I would love to see that more. I mean, now there's multiple crises in the world, and all are are very, very important to cover, but there's a lot of things that are not deemed as important as other things, and I think that like I have tried in different ways to, for instance, get Danish media to cover the situation in Africa's Horn, the hunger that is taking place there more. Invited on a visit or trip, different things, but there's no actual will to do it, and so that's because if it starts with a increased will to actually cover these things that can seem very, very far away from the readership. And that I also I do understand that of course, as a media, as a journalist, you need to cover what is relevant to the reader. But I think there's more that can be done, and I think that you can make these things because it is actually relevant for people in Denmark, I believe.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem, that people in Denmark or in Sweden don't think that what's happening in Africa or in Pakistan or in South America is relevant to them because it's too far away. But I mean, we know that looking at just, you mentioned the water crisis and the climate crisis, we're actually one world, and we are facing the same problem, even though if it is on different scales. And coming in there on what you said about reporting, I mean, when I started reporting, I actually think that the journalists in the 90s and the 80s wrote more about various parts of the world than what they do today. And I don't know, I can't really explain that that development, but that's my feeling. One last thing I wanted to ask you, if we don't have any more questions in the chat, is the authenticity. And we look at social media today. A lot of information comes via social media platforms. We have numerous examples of people who claim that this video is taken from such and such place. And then some people investigate the fact and the truth in that matter and realize that it's not the case at all. It might have been a photo that's even, I mean, many years old or taken in a totally different context and different place. How do we, as consumers of information and media, but also as journalists and communicators, is there a way to test the authenticity of pictures that we are fed on social media?
That's a good question. We have also rules for this and how old a photo can be, and the story that accompanies it. I think that's difficult. Maybe someone else has the answer, but it's a big responsibility that lies on NGOs, but also media, that people can trust that we are actually adhering to this. Because it's very, very hard for a consumer, a social media user to see that, to discover it, whether a photo is used now but is actually 10 years old and the person on it is completely different now. In terms of manipulating photos, that's not something that I have experienced a lot that in the sector that we do, but of course that's something that I hope that nobody does.
Right, thank you. A few comments here. One from Lorna. We avoid stock imagery for this specific reason, and we like to know that the images are actually of our projects / people that actually met, that people that we've actually met and spoken to. So that's one way of course to authenticize what you produce, and also Sorry.
No, yes, that's given, and that's what we also do always. We have a collective media bank for all Plan International that all countries can upload to, and all information is there. So it's not possible, and it will be detected if I, for instance, use a photo that is from one project and from one area, use it in another setting.
Yeah.
That is accurate.
We're unfortunately running out of time totally, but I have one quick question from Afia, or maybe a comment. Would watermarking and timestamping videos and photos take care of the authenticity to some extent?
In terms of it not being reshared and used?
Yeah, and also probably from confirming that it is actually from this place and this date, in a way.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I mean, I would hope that the stamp of Plan International would be enough, and that we as NGOs can be trusted that we do this right.
Thank you. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us. We will have to move on to the next speaker. Thank you. And enjoy Bornholm and the People's Meeting. And we have Joy Kibarabara, Adjunct Lecturer, Department of Media Studies in Stockholm, or Stockholm University, because you're now in Eskilstuna, you said today.
Yes.
Welcome very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Gorel, for the invitation. It's a privilege to join this workshop. As you mentioned, I am affiliated with the Department of Media Studies at Stockholm University. And my area of research is situated within the broad field of journalism studies. I'm also, like you, a trained journalist. But my specific research interests are in understanding how journalism can serve society better through what I'm calling socially responsible journalistic practices. And specifically constructive journalism, which is the object of my presentation today. And I should mention real quick, just listening to Andreas and the previous conversation, I was just excited because there's a lot of parallels to what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm just going to be building on some of the things that he mentioned. I had him mention the word constructive solutions. He talked about engaging and involving ordinary, everyday citizens in the discussion. He talked about including diverse voices, all of those wonderful things and terms that I will also allude to in my presentation. So if I may, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. Okay, so let me just start from here. Okay, so I just wanted to, first of all, start by pointing out some of the key takeaways from my presentation today. As you can see from the screen, I'm going to be illuminating the why, and the how of constructive journalism. I will also touch on how constructive journalism can serve as a tool to rebuild trust and public engagement. And I will also share some helpful practical tips for those who may be considering incorporating constructive journalism techniques in daily news practice. And just so that we're clear, when I talk about constructive journalism, I'm referring to what has been described as an emerging form of journalistic practice that not only illuminates social problems, but also possible solutions. And all of this for the purpose of enhancing democratic participation and also for the well-being of society. So to better understand and to better contextualize my presentation today, I wanted to begin right here with this cliche, which I'm sure most of us listening have come across or heard about. If it bleeds, it leads. This is a cliche that has come to be associated with traditional journalistic practices that have tended to prioritize problem-based narratives. And as we know, this approach to journalism practice is not limited to one media context. It cuts across all geographical and media contexts, as well as news topics as well, including those focused on environmental issues, in this case, water, as evidenced in this sample of news headlines that I screenshot from prominent news sites. And one of my favorite ones is this one from BBC News, which at some point used the word, took a UN warning and made it, use the word vampiric, global water use as a warning, and or UN warns of imminent global crisis. So these kinds of narratives are not new to us, and we've seen them repeated over and over again in different media platforms. Now, the result of these kinds of problem-based narratives or sensational or negative headlines has been well documented by both scholars and practitioners. And the main concerns or the main thread and the things that keep emerging are one of those is that there is declining trust levels. And by this, I mean trust in the news content itself, as well as the news media as well. There is also increasing news avoidance, and this can range from selective news avoidance to total news avoidance. Another thread that has been well documented is partial or complete disengagement from the news. And all of these taken together are said to negatively impact democratic participation. And one of the publications or organizations that has documented these trends over the years is the Reuters Digital News Reports. And they've done this across different media contexts, across different geographical contexts. And I just wanted to point this out just to also better understand the why of constructive journalism. In their 2022 report, for example, they found that interest in the news had fallen sharply across the markets that they researched, from 63% to 51%. And in their current 2023 report, they have also shed more light on the continuing decline of trust. And they found that only 40% of the people that they surveyed say they trust most news most of the time. They have also documented in their current report continued concerns about false and misleading information. And they have also, again, continued to document news avoidance, which stands at 36%, where those surveyed said they avoid the news often or sometimes, and this is across all markets. So we might want to know, for example, why are people avoiding the news? Why do people avoid the news? If I may refer to the 2022 Digital News Report as well, they documented different reasons as to why people avoid the news, and some of the most common ones, and perhaps some of them should not come as a surprise to most of us. One of those is that the news is over politicized. The news negatively affects their mood. There's too much news, and some people are worn out by the quantity and the amount of news. Again, there are those who feel the news is untrustworthy, it is biased. There are those, of course, who say this inevitably leads to unnecessary arguments or avoidable arguments. And there are those who also do not find the news useful. So then, why should we care about how the news is produced? Why are we having this conversation today? Why does constructive journalism matter? Journalism matters, as Ava and Stinson have explained there. One, because journalism covers and shapes all aspects of society. Journalism influences, it articulates, journalism produces culture. Journalism is also the first draft of history. And in essence, journalism is epistemic because it produces knowledge about the world. So we need to care about the kind of knowledge that journalism is producing and how that is being produced, presented, and consumed as well. So to better expand our understanding of what constructive journalism entails, what it constitutes, the first thing is to understand that constructive journalism should be viewed as a holistic approach to news reporting. In other words, constructive journalism is concerned about all the steps, all the stages of the news production process. Every step of the news production process, from story ideation to story production, to story consumption, to feedback, matters. Second, constructive journalism serves as an antidote to problem-based narratives, as I had previously said, and especially the idea of taking a distance from the negative bias of the media. Constructive journalism also aims for critical perspectives, and these are actualized at every step of the news production process. One of those is by carefully interrogating the sources, carefully interrogating the solutions that are being presented, both trying to highlight injustices, but also pointing the discussion towards possible solutions. And as Andreas said in the previous presentation, constructive journalism aims for nuanced coverage. Context, the right context, background information is really, really important in helping enhance the constructiveness of a particular news story. So the expected outcome for this kind of reporting can be explained in three dimensions. One, at the individual level, at the organizational level, as well as the societal level. So at the micro level, which is the individual level, constructive journalism is expected to counteract a negative perception of the world. And if this happens, then an individual should feel much better about the news that they consumed. At the meso level, the media company or the media organization also benefits from constructive reporting. First of all, if news audiences feel that the news media is being constructive, then it means, for example, that the news organization will gain loyalty, will gain more viewers. The media brand will be regarded as positive, it will be regarded as helpful. And at the macro level, at the societal level, societal progress is expected when constructive journalism is implemented, is successfully implemented. This happens if solutions are illuminated, role models are illuminated examples of things that are working are documented and illuminated. So this then presents strong and good examples of what constructive journalism can achieve at the societal level. In my recently concluded dissertation project, I had an opportunity to interview practicing journalists as well as news audiences in Kenya, the context of my study. And I wanted to find out the perceptions about constructive journalism, about good quality reporting. They collectively came up with these attributes which speak to the aim and the purpose of constructive journalism, which I thought were also useful in helping us understand what constructive journalism really is. So one of those is the idea of investigative reporting, or what one journalist called a 360-degree approach. And the idea behind this is to really get to the root cause of the problem, take time, get to the root cause of the problem, and conclude the story. Don't leave the news audiences hanging. Of course, solutions orientation is a key component of constructive journalism. The idea of being audience-centric, focusing on the needs of your news audiences is also very important to constructive journalism. As Andreas also said before, the idea of inclusiveness and diversity in terms of sources, and this goes beyond just using elite sources, is also very, very important. And all of this rigor that is applied to a particular story is also very, very important to constructive journalism. So now, how do we then rebuild trust and engagement with the public? Constructive journalism has the framework and has the tools and can serve as a tool to build trust and engagement with the public. At the core of constructive journalism is this idea of co-creating content with news audiences or with the public. So in doing so, it is imperative that a journalist, for example, practicing constructive journalism, actively seek out what I'm calling context-specific public participation. This can come in many different forms: surveys, town hall meetings, focus group discussions, in context such as in the African context, where they're community-based. You can engage opinion leaders, trusted opinion leaders. And for meaningful engagement to occur, the public needs to feel involved in the process. And they need to be involved in every step of the news production stage. And one of the things that news organizations can do to build trust and engagement with the public is, if they're involved in the production of a news story, it is important to remunerate and recognize their contributions. And this can be in the form of giving them credit in a story, maybe even giving them some sort of financial remuneration, just so that they feel a part and parcel of the story that is being produced. News audiences, in the end, just want to know that they're being listened to and that their problems are being represented in the manner in which that they are on the ground. Trust and engagement also increases when the public feels that they are well informed and well educated about the issues of the day. And this is where explanatory type of approach comes in. Constructive journalism advocates for the use of data, for the use of combining visuals and text, as was also said in the previous conversation, the use of graphical elements as a way of enhancing and explaining the story, enhancing the constructiveness of a given story. And as previously mentioned, too much negativity is a turnoff, and it increases news avoidance. So to counter this, constructive journalism, or those people practicing constructive journalism, should always strive to de-emphasize problem-based narratives, and where possible, even avoid them altogether. So some helpful tips. These are just some that I've already articulated. One of those that is very important is diversifying the sources. And again, as some of the journalists joining today know, is that we tend to defer to elite sources and government sources because of different reasons. They're easily accessible, so constructive journalism is very useful in the sense that it tries to reach out to other voices, ordinary, everyday people. What do they have? All of us are members of this community, so it's only fair that different voices speak to the community problems as well as the community solutions. That said, it's important that we take note of this idea of false balance. Just because someone said something doesn't mean that they should be quoted in a story. I mean, we need to interrogate what they're saying, the authenticity of what they're saying. Another one that is important, of course, as we know in journalism, words matter. So constructive journalism also is cognizant of avoiding divisive and polarizing language. And as I just mentioned, it's important that we think of constructive journalism as a holistic approach. Every step of the news-making process matters. The decisions that we're making matter. From story ideation, the interview, the writing process, it matters. And taken together, all of this leads to constructive reporting. So just wanted to give this example from the handbook from Constructive Journalism, which is a useful resource for those of us willing to take this up. And one of the concepts that they talk about is this idea of solutions-focused interviewing. Since we're talking about the global water crisis, there are different ways that you can take the focus away from the problem, even though it is important to articulate what it is, but take the conversation forward by asking questions. For example, what is the most effective solutions? When you engage in the public, ask them, how can we work together to effectively address the issue? How can the solution benefit other communities? What is the evidentiary support for the solution? So this is just one technique and one tip that can lead to more constructive reporting. The most important tip that I can share today is that change of the mindset. If you are like me, when I first trained for journalism, the definition of news that we got is that news is bad news. That's the classic definition. And that is ingrained in a lot of us in the way we see journalism. So changing the mindset is the first step. As the Reuters Institute Digital News Report, the current one has found, is that the news audiences are looking for constructive reporting. It's important that we think about incorporating more constructive reporting in our daily news tasks. Just wanted to share this also, which was a quote from a journalist that I spoke with during my dissertation. And this is the case they made for constructive reporting. Journalists should not see their role just as passive chroniclers chronicling events, but actually because we live in these communities, the policies of the governments affects their life. They should also look at ways in which they can also offer solutions in storytelling. And last but not least, constructive journalism should be and is synonymous with quality journalism. And what is a quality story? A quality story, according to this journalist that I interviewed, is back to the basics of journalism. A quality story is well balanced, it is well sourced, it is of public interest, it is well told, it gives context, meaning, and leaves me with something to think about. So the idea has to be good, the sourcing has to be good, but also the execution of the story has got to be really excellent. So thank you so much for listening. Happy to hear your comments, your thoughts, and your questions.
Thank you very much, Joy. Oops, there's my video. Thank you very much, Joy. Very interesting. A lot of comments have been rolling into the chat box. We also have some tips and some questions. First of all, that first the survey that you showed where people were losing faith in the old journalism, so to speak. Where was it done? Was it a worldwide survey or was it a Kenyan survey?
Thanks for that question. So this is a Reuters Digital Institute surveys, and they conduct these surveys every year. And this particular one, if I remember correctly, it was done in 46 markets. So it's quite representative of what's going on in the media ecology, so to speak. And I just picked that one out as an example. This has also been documented in lots and lots of scholarly research studies that have confirmed that this is actually, people are losing interest, people are disengaging, yes. So
it's a global phenomenon.
Yes, it is,
yes.
Absolute, yeah.
And Ramani has posted also the digital news report from 2023. It's in the chat.
Yes.
For everyone who's interested and would like to download. Yes, he's just also said that there's the digital news reports sharing. We have a lot of comments and thank yous. And I'm just looking to see so we don't miss out on any questions.
Sure.
And we posted the link also for the handbook for constructive journalism. So those of you interested, don't miss out on that.
Yes, and I should add, if I might interject, I'm happy to share additional resources from the Constructive Institute, for example, which is the leading organization that is trying to popularize constructive journalism. It's based in Denmark, as you know. There's others as well. I mean, I've recently wrote my dissertation on constructive journalism, so I'm happy to share those as well, and other resources.
Yeah, that would be great. If you can send them to me, and then I will send them out to the rest of the participants. That would be great. Here's a question, Carlos. Thank you for this great presentation. I would like to know, when did the concept of constructive journalism start? And is it not the way journalism is supposed to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing in understanding constructive journalism is that the idea of being constructive is actually not new to journalism. I mean, it can be traced back, but there's the new contemporary movement that is trying to sort of bring it back and especially focus on solutions. Let's say it's about a decade, slightly over a decade old. So it's the reason why constructive journalism is still being referred to as emerging, because we're still learning more about it. And when I say this, I'm referring to the contemporary movement of constructive journalism. But the idea of trying to articulate what is working, what is not working, is not new to journalism. It's something that has been part of journalism. And yes, this is how journalism should be, should have been all along. Journalism should always be constructive, and quality journalism is constructive journalism. I mean, those two should be synonymous, if you ask me. So this is how journalism should be. But the reality is that, we're still struggling, and there are many reasons, for example, political economy reasons that tend to trounce quality or good reporting. So, but this is a movement that is really gaining popularity, not just here in Europe, but around the world. And hopefully we'll see where it goes, whether it becomes mainstream, whether this becomes part and parcel of what journalists automatically do. This is something that can be, maybe a few years from now, we can look back and see how effective this has been.
All right, thank you. Ramani also has a question. It's a nice presentation. Thank you very much. Question: constructive and solution-driven journalism, is that the same or is it different?
Oh, that's a great question. When you think of constructive journalism, the best way to look at it is look at it as an umbrella term. Solutions journalism is a term that is synonymous with a form of constructive journalism that is practiced in the US. That's the label that they use. So solutions, the idea of adding solutions to a story, that's a technique of being constructive. But this is an ongoing debate in terms of the labeling, which one is what, are they all the same thing? But personally, I argue that solutions is a technique of constructive journalism, is one of the tools that you can use to enhance the constructiveness of your story.
Right, thank you. One last question before we have to move on to the next speaker. Ryan says, are there any tips for pitching constructive stories to journalists who may be or are used to wanting negative headlines?
That's a great question. If I may borrow from what Andreas said when you asked him about, visuals, and I think he talked about editorial policies having to change. Sometimes as an individual journalist, I mean, you may have the desire to do these kinds of stories, but of course we don't operate in a vacuum. I mean, most of us probably are affiliated with the larger news organizations, and we encounter editors, and they're guided by these editorial policies, and sometimes some of them are looking for those stories that will quote unquote sell. So I think it's a question of building trust and sort of demonstrating to your news editor that these are the kinds of stories that people want. And I think if the news organizations start seeing that people are reading and are interested in these kinds of stories, which is something that the Reuters digital report and others have confirmed, that people want these kinds of stories. So it's just a question of building trust, being persistent in order for us to overcome that editorial barrier that may want us to stick to the problematic narratives that we're used to just because they think it sells better.
Right.
But constructive stories also sell, and this is what people want, actually.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. We need to move on. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
A lot of good and interesting remarks there. We have our next speaker with us, Stephanie Corso. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Lovely. How are y'all?
Thank you very much. We're all fine. And welcome to Water and Communications. Where are you calling in from, Stephanie?
Fort Worth, Texas.
Wow, so it's early morning.
It's early morning. I just got back from AWWA's conference last night. So I got home, went to bed, and woke up, and here I am.
Great. Stephanie Corso, CEO and co-founder of Rogue Water. You're going to talk about the importance of listening. So we're going to listen, and the floor is yours.
All right. So amazing to begin with Joy, because so many of the things that she said, I'm just going to build upon in the sense that I wanted to give a little bit more context about who I am and where I'm coming from with when it comes to communication. I do have an undergrad in marketing. My master's is in environmental science, but really my communications approach comes from the 10 years that I did outreach and engagement for municipal utilities here in the US, and then 6 years within the work that I've been doing when I started our communication company and firm. And so really, and when I say that, being out there, engaging with people, talking to them, hearing about what they don't understand, what they're concerned about, their fears, and really, that's really what was the catalyst for me to explore and go down the path that has really been what my career is about. So studying the neuroscience of why people respond and react the way that they do, the neuroscience behind storytelling, and really understanding why that is the way that we are hardwired to receive and understand information, and just the psychology with relationships and how human beings have relationships and the different things that go into that. And so I'm really the social scientist of the water sector, and I regularly get asked to talk about storytelling. In fact, that's what I was originally asked to speak about. But the beginning of this year, I just really began to see, as I was out in the community and out at different water-related activities, that I think Joy even said this too, as going back to the foundations and going back to the basics. And those were the places where I was really seeing that we have so many challenges and we're bombarded by so much information that it's easy to want to jump straight to the tactics and start feeling like you're moving towards making it better and making the pain go away in some cases, depending upon what the communication situation is for your organization. But what I really saw is that we were missing this foundational piece of listening and really understanding the people that we were trying to communicate to. And so then when I was reached out to, I asked, can I talk a little bit more about that? Because I think it really does come to us first, and reframing the way that we look at how we're communicating, how much we know about our audience, and what those messages are that we are sharing with that audience that we're speaking to. And so it really comes like that. So it really comes down to listening. And I participated in a listening session at my local university. It's actually my alma mater. It was a community listening session that was about a variety of topics such as housing, transportation, sustainability. And it was during that session and the reports that I just had this very visceral reminder of still there's such a value gap with the community at large in terms of the value of water. Typically, we're out of sight, out of mind, at least in the US. Most utilities here don't have dedicated communication staff, especially the smaller utilities. And so they're not communicating unless something bad is happening or there's a break. And that I was in this room of community leaders, and even in this room of leaders, that water just wasn't at the top of priority list because people just have so many other things on their mind. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but I'm really going to focus on the messaging portion of that. And that, for me, messaging means all of the different places that we are communicating with the public. And I know we have several different audiences in this audience today, with journalists, with communicators, maybe even some scientists and researchers. But I think that all of these foundational pieces are going to be important to communication wherever you're at. But back to messaging, one of the things that I noticed in really seeing this gap between what we're saying and what our communities need to hear from us is that I think that there is this mentality within the industry, being incredible subject matter experts, that we believe that since we know the science, therefore we know the message. And I think that thinking can sometimes be a trap, because really ultimately what we need to know is, yes, the science and the facts are important, but we need to know the audience that we're communicating to, so we can make sure that we're meeting them where they're at in terms of their understanding and knowledge of the content that we're trying to share with them. And this quote is around innovation, but to me, this was, I love the way that this framed this up, is that innovation should begin with a problem that no one has noticed before, not a solution that no one has thought of before. And I think that that's really critical when it comes to communication too, because I feel like right now when I get asked to, what do we do? It's usually related around some sort of crisis or some sort of risk communication or avoiding a crisis, whether it's PFAS or other emerging contaminants or lead. And I really feel that the focus is on how do we solve for that? How do we get them to think differently? And I'm like, I think the problem is that we don't know our audience enough to even know where to begin to message. So that's the first place that I always go towards is knowing your audience. And if we don't know our audience, we may not even realize what the problem is. And we risk spinning our wheels on solutions, in this case with messaging that's not resonating and not sticking. And again, going back to Joy's, I think that public participation piece and really creating those points of dialogue and participation can help figure out what those gaps might be. And also just understanding that with our industry now, just with the living in the digital communication world that we are in, knowing how quickly misinformation can spread, it's so important for us to be making that investment in communication. And that means several different things to me. So the very first thing I want to say is related to us. And a lot of this is making the investment in understanding where we're coming from, some of the things that may be barriers to our own ability to see things from a different perspective. There was a speaker at AWWA that talked about innovation and disruption and really talked about the first step is disrupting yourself. And I love that. And I think that that's really what we have to do, is take a step back, take off that subject matter hat, and really think about communication differently and understand that it's not something that we can just check a box on. It's not a project. It's really this relationship. And that relationship is going to be foundational to the trust piece that we need to be building with our communities for a variety of reasons, for buy-in, to have them be ambassadors for us, for investment, for funding approval. It all comes down to trust, and that only happens if we're doing the work to build those relationships. And making sure that communication is at the table from the beginning. So whether you have internal, you hire external, it's really important to have that perspective, that lens, that voice at the table at the beginning of any project, so that we're seeing further down the road, we're looking down the road a little differently than, say, the engineers, the researchers, the operators are. And it's important to have that voice straight away. And then just the literal meaning of the word investment is showing up for communications. At least in the US, sometimes we'll put out RFPs for projects. Somebody will come to a council meeting and say that utilities shouldn't be marketing themselves. And then the folks that are presenting the request for funding haven't been properly trained or given the talking points to really know how to respond to that. And then that opportunity may die right there. And I think that we're in a place where we absolutely have a responsibility and a necessity to be, it's not marketing ourselves, it's communicating and it's building that trust. And I think if we talk about it from that lens and we reclaim that argument and don't let folks come in and say that we're trying to market ourselves, that's a foundational piece of well. And I mean, for whatever the cost of that might look like on a line item on our budgets, it's really helping. The lack of trust in the industry is costing us millions in legal fees and lost time. And, quite frankly, in some places, putting money in the pockets of bottled water companies. And so just making the investment up front to be able to begin to have those conversations and be a part of the conversations with our customers is so important. Diving a little deeper into knowing your audience, I know that we have some folks in the room that are journalists, and I was kind of asked to speak to what communication topics can you talk about with them, and really building a bridge. And for me, I'm speaking from, I was just in a room at a biosolids and public perception conference last week, and as communicators, when we get the opportunity to present, we do talk about building those relationships with media. And the amount of fear and distrust with utility organizations related to media, I mean, it's palpable. When you're in the room, you can feel it. And so while we encourage them to build that bridge from their side, I think that just knowing that as a journalist coming into the room with utility providers, in most cases, what I have seen is that there's already we're already making these assumptions about one another, and that I think from both sides we need to be working to build that bridge. I think a lot of the action items that Joy gave would be very helpful in that, but really to build those relationships. Again, just to reiterate what Joy said, to really help that focus be on other things than the doom and gloom. And to help us get our word out there about the work that we're doing. And that doesn't mean that we're sugarcoating things or we're not telling the truth or shining a light on the things that do need to be brought to the public eye, but really that there's so many things related to water and the work that utilities do that it's such a complex issue, and that the media should be a partner for us to help us in simplifying and beginning to show those connections for folks so that they can understand, that they can be engaged, so that they can be a part of it. Sounds like constructive journalism is a key way to do this. So yeah, really, really working to understand that there is a lot of distrust in the room, and that we need to be working towards building those connections. And then some of that is also just putting it back on understanding that as a journalist, understanding that, and just thinking about going back to the basics and saying, okay, what's something that I can do to make it less scary for utilities to come to me to help us tell our story? And that may even be simply just having that first initial conversation, building those relationships, because again, that's an audience knowing of what is it that makes this difficult for you to be vulnerable and to tell stories. And I know there's issues of there's no such thing as off the record. So understanding that there are things to be careful about in those relationships, but just making it normal to have regular check-ins, collaborative check-ins, again, with community members, to getting a sense of what they want to hear too. Journalists can also be the voice on the streets and saying, I've been talking with people and they've been asking questions about this, and that can help utilities have a sense of, okay, what should I prioritize in terms of what I'm communicating? So again, that active listening and really being curious and asking questions and getting to the root of things and understanding. And I think that journalists can really help us to get that sense, because people may tell them things that they won't tell the utility, or may tell them things in a different way that they wouldn't tell it. So I think that there's such an opportunity for that bridge building. And I think we're at a really important time where we need to be looking at the trust piece there. And then for my communications, people, especially with utilities, just understanding that you are the direct link between your organization and your community. I know we get bombarded by meetings or conferences or these things that pull us out of the office, but I just really encourage you from my own experiences to get up and go out and meet them, create dialogue either with community groups or to show up at community events, and just really use that as an opportunity to listen to them. And just being prepared that there is going to be a period of time where you may just initially hear a lot of the complaints and the complaining, and that there will always be an element of that. But that really, once people start to feel like they're being heard, and even better yet, maybe some of that feedback is being captured in something like a listening session that can then be distilled and synthesized into a communication plan or an outreach activity, then once people begin to feel heard and they start to see that action, they'll open up and feel safe to tell you more, or to give you more information, and to really have that dialogue to see what they really need to hear from you and what those information gaps might be. So being mindful of time, just the bottom line is that the most important piece for me really is for people to reframe the way that they think about communication, that it's not a project, it's a relationship. It's something that the work is never over. It takes time to not only to create those relationships, but to maintain them over a period of time. And just reframing the way that our minds approach that and think about that, and so that we don't feel like we're constantly running in place. Some hard truths to accept are that by inserting more communication into your work, that it might feel like, oh, well, now this is just going to stretch out the timeline. Things are going to take longer. There's now this added cost. But it might mean new policies, or it might mean change period. But I think all of these are saving us from potential expenses with, again, the legal expenses, or the delay on construction, or just the delay in a project because we can't get funding approval. We're offsetting that by insurance. It's our insurance of getting out there and creating some understanding and bringing the public in before we get going, and then they insert themselves against our timeline and everything that we had planned anyways. And so I just think it's such an important investment in our day-to-day activities that we take. And also the understanding that every single person, whether you're a communications person or not, has a role in communicating, whether that's to learn the skills to be a better communications person yourself. Some of that is just emotional intelligence. So the thing that I love about communication is becoming a better communicator just makes you a better human being as well, because you listen better, you're able to process information as you get it. So maybe you're not responding and reacting immediately in the way that you used to, because you've taken the time to learn those skills on a daily basis, really is what it takes. And so I think whether you're a communicator or not, it could be learning those skills, it could be approving a budget, or it could be just getting out of the way, quite frankly, and letting the folks who know this work do that work and help to rebuild that trust with our organizations and the work that we do. And really, I strongly believe that it's all of our responsibility to get better at communication, to create, I think it's a key part of creating resilient, sustainable water futures for all members of our community. So yes, I just wanted to be mindful of time. This is the contact information if you want to scan that QR code with your phones. That gives you all of our communication information to reach us back at Rogue Water. We do content strategy and communication strategy and content development. And again, from that lens of the utility speaking to their customer, because it's what we've been doing for 16 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have a few questions in the chat, but I also want to underline what Joy also underlined from your speak. Key takeaways: communication is a relationship and not a project. I think that's something that we should think about every day. We have Nancy asking, the budgets are tight with utilities of supply chain companies. The communications or marketing budget seems to always be the first thing that goes. What is the best way to convince companies that communications is integral and that their future depends on it?
Yes, education in any way that you can. I mean, become the squeaky wheel in your organization. My mentor called those whispering campaigns, where you don't even realize when you're using certain terminology and words and that you are the ambassador for it in the organization. It kind of just soaks in on people. So just to be constantly speaking in that way, speaking about those like the long-term goals of that, And I've gone from no budget to budget, and it was really by developing a proof of concept. So finding the smallest possible way that you can show even a small degree of improvement and change, and be able to prototype that, test that, and get and just have that proof of concept that you can then build upon more. So for us, it was related to drought and communication around drought. We had a PR kind of, it wasn't a fiasco, but there was a lot of unhappy people one year. We decided to be more proactive and do more engagement and outreach the second year, and it completely changed the response from the public that following year. And they were all things that we kept low cost, so that we could show the impact of that without having to have a huge budget to do it. So start small and be able to show that proof of concept.
Thank you. Megna says, I think it's essential that journalists and researchers, both scientific and social scientists, work hand in hand to build that relationship of trust with the audience when it comes to relaying information regarding water. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Yes, it's going to take all of us, again, kind of understanding what our role is in that. I don't expect everybody to be a stellar communicator and be able to go do presentations about it, but I think that being able to having those baseline understandings and those foundations, and most importantly to get out of the way for the people who need to do their work and to get in there and communicate.
And Marissa says, Stephanie, what would you say to WU directors who leave the communication on SM to community manager who is not engaging audience, just posting? What can they do to be more real? And congrats on your works. I've followed you for a long time.
Oh, thank you. So if I understand the question is, what do you do with somebody who is just not doing anything to engage, but is just
reposting, and when the communication is left not to communication people, but to managers who's not engaging their audience?
Yeah, for me, that really comes down to education around just being omni-channel, and that everyone, when we're providing a service such as water or wastewater services, and your audience is everyone, you can't communicate to everyone the same way, because everyone gets their information in a little different way. So it's so important to approach communication as a pie, and you have all of these different pieces of pie, and each one of those pieces of pie might be reaching a different piece of your audience differently. And so maybe just presenting it in a concern around missing certain segments of the audience, and that really just strictly posting and putting information out there is not an effective way to build engagement or to build trust. And that it really comes down to, what are we doing that's creating space for us to have meaningful dialogue with the people that we serve? And social media, in a lot of cases, utilities might even be turning off comments or such on there. And so it becomes an extension of their website. I just think it comes back to, are we reaching our audience? Are we reaching all of them? Who are we missing? And then, are what we're doing affecting public trust? Because public trust is essential to support buy-in investment from for the utility. So I guess presenting that through knowing your audience again, and knowing who you are presenting, if this is leadership that you're presenting to, making sure that you're selling the case through the lens of what matters to them, and speaking about communication in a way that matters to them.
Right, thank you. Very, very good. Very helpful piece of advice as well, to talk to certain group of people so that they understand the message, and not that. Very helpful. Yeah, I think we need to move on to our next speaker. Stephanie, thank you very much for joining us here in the workshop, though it's very early for you. Thanks for your effort. And we are going to move on to the next speaker of the program, Alphonce Shiundu.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alphonse, where are you calling in from?
I'm in Nairobi today. Yes, that's where I'm connecting from.
Right.
In
right.
Kenya, in East Africa. So
in Kenya and East Africa.
In East Africa. Yes.
I'm in Nairobi today makes me think that you might not have been in Nairobi yesterday, or that you're traveling a lot.
Yes, it's a season of travel. We're doing quite a bit on the continent, training journalists on fact checking. So yes, yeah.
Alphonce, you are Kenya editor for the Africa Check, and you and I are going to talk about information pollution and disinformation trends, and how we counter this false information. First of all, I would like to ask you, when we spoke previously about the slot, you definitely want to call it information pollution instead of fake news, which most people might call it. But why do you want to call it information pollution?
I would have 3 reasons for doing that. So the first reason is we call it information pollution because when you say fake news, it's a very narrow definition. So when we talk about fake news, we just think about fabricated content that looks like news that is put out there, which is definitely false. So it's very narrow. But there are 2 more reasons why we would not use the term fake news, because it's about the trust in journalism. When people use the word fake news, some of the politicians or the people who use that word a lot might refer to many things. So sometimes they could just be referring to bad journalism. Sometimes it could just be inaccurate content on a story. But fundamentally, when we think about news, we think about something that is accurate. So we usually say it has to be accurate. The content has to be accurate, and the context too has to be correct. So that's how we think about news. And in the space that we operate, the whole space, or the whole information ecosystem, when you think about false information, it's just that it pollutes the conversation around important topics. So we say we think of it as a pollution, not just as fake news. Fake news is just one element with which the peddlers of false information use to pollute the information ecosystem.
Right, thank you. Good explanation there. Africa Check, one of the biggest, or maybe the largest fact-checking organization in Africa. You are spread out over the continent. And when you started to work with fact-checking, was there a particular moment, or was there something that triggered your interest in fact-checking?
Yes, I actually started as a journalist, and it was by accident that I got into the space of fact-checking. So it was just in 2014, I had worked as a journalist for about 12 years then. And then there was this story that was put out in the national newspaper. So there was a mass hysteria from the political class about the public wage bill. So when teachers were asking for salaries, they would be pointed out, it would be pointed out to them that, look, the wage bill is too high, so we cannot increase your salaries. And inflation was biting at the time. So when I looked at the numbers that the government was putting out about the wage bill and compared it to the actual numbers that had been published by government agencies, the numbers were off. And that's the issue that I raised. But unfortunately, the newspaper that I worked for at the time could not publish it as a fact check. So fact checking was basically unknown within the media circle. So they published it as an op-ed. And after they published it as an op-ed, we got into an exchange with the president's spokesperson, where he also wrote an op-ed, and I wrote back saying why the numbers were wrong, and I could point them out to the specific pages of government documents that showed the numbers were wrong. So it's at that point where now I figured if I could do this to stop the circulation of false information, especially when we're talking policy and you're looking at policies being pushed or statements being made by public figures, and they have no backing, like the figures are off. I thought it would be an interesting place to just do fact checking. But then when I got into fact checking, I realized that sometimes when you start doing a fact check, you don't know whether the answer is going to be correct or not. You don't know whether the person would be accurate or whether he would be, the statement that you're checking is false. So there was a lot of learning there. And by the time I got into Africa Check in 2017 to start the Kenya office, it was a great learning opportunity to even engage policymakers about the importance of using facts, because when we do not want them to build castles in the sky. We want them to make policies that reflect the lived realities of the people. So not just picking numbers from wherever they hear them, but actually looking at those numbers and asking about those numbers and then deciding whether those numbers make sense or whether the numbers are off. So just pushing them, pushing policymakers or even the public to be honest about the kind of debates that we do, that was something for me that I thought would be very important.
That lack of data or lack of reliable data was something that you and I also spoke about previously, and there are a lot of countries where statistics may be old or not even, there might not even be statistics for certain things, but as you said, then politicians and policymakers can just make up whatever they think is suitable for their own agenda. So how do we go about, I mean, this lack of verifiable and correct data becomes a problem, and how do we go about that? How can that be solved in a way?
Okay, thanks, Laura. So the lack of data is not just a problem, because Africa Check operates in 4 countries. We're in South Africa, we're in Nigeria, we're in Senegal, and we're in Kenya. So one of the reasons why we find that is a problem that is prevalent in the 4 countries we operate in, and even in the countries where we sometimes want to fact check, but there is no reliable data. So the example I usually give is, if you ask around, or even if you search, how many, Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, but how many people are actually in Nigeria? What's the population of Nigeria? So when I think when my colleague in Nigeria was doing a fact check on that, he was revealing how it's in the interest of the people who are doing the counting to pad numbers. And do we actually know how many Nigerians there are, or for that matter, any African country? Because population tends to be tied to resource allocation. And so when the census is being done in the different places, then that becomes a problem. In countries like Kenya, where agriculture is the backbone of the economy, you find that we've never done an agricultural census to know how many farmers are there and what's the acreage under land. So a lot of that has been done by estimates. So there's no like actual data that looks at households and acreage of land. And a big subject like food security and a sector that contributes, say, over 20%, like 1/5 of the country's GDP. And then you have that problem where we do not have data to know exactly what the numbers are. It's encouraging though that it's just this year that the government has started registering farmers, but I'm not sure whether that would turn into an agricultural census, because it's something that would actually help in the different aspects. So it's one of the biggest employers, but we can't track the number of employers or people employed in the agriculture sector, because most of them are doing that informally. Then we also have the biggest contributor to the GDP. By tracking that and breaking down that to farmers, that also becomes a problem. And then we also have the thought about food security in Kenya, and yet we don't know. So that's one of the things. And the other headache that we have on the continent is about the cause of death data. So what's killing a lot of, what disease is killing a lot of people in the different countries. And anecdotally, and this is an example that would interest some of the people listening, is when you find a minister, a member of parliament, or any other senior public figure or business titan, when they die of cancer, successively, so the one after the other, then you find that all of a sudden, everybody is thinking cancer is the biggest killer in Kenya, for example. Yet there are HIV, malaria, TB, those are some of the highly ranked. And when you drill down on the data, the people who collect this data tell you, when they look at the death certificates, there's a big problem in how the cause of death is determined. It's not determined by the hospital, especially when somebody did not die at the hospital. So if you die at home, we have the village headman who then reports to the chief. And when they report to the chief, they just say this person was sick, he had fever, and then he was sick, and the chief will write malaria. The underlying cause of death will not be noted. So those are some of the things that make it a bit difficult to collect that kind of data. Yet it's a very important metric that needs to be collected, so that it helps with policy making, because healthcare is one of the biggest places that we suffer. We spend a lot of money on as Kenyans.
Yes, right, yes. Right. I was thinking, like we heard about previously, Joy was speaking about how a lot of people have lost faith already in like normal regular news or that standard news or your standard radio station, and that constructive journalism is on the rise, but it's still an emerging form of journalism. And at the same time, as a lot of people and media consumers lose faith in that more old media, so to speak, many young activists and politicians rely on the internet to gain support and to spread information. And yet we have a lot of information pollution on social media platforms. How do we sort that paradox that we need the social platforms maybe to spread our information and our message at the same time? There's a lot of information pollution.
Not pretend to have a solution to that one. But what I would say is, as more people get online, especially on the continent, as many of them get connected via smartphone or get access to the internet in their homes, the basic thing is for them to understand what they are getting into. So how the internet operates. So people call it media and digital and information literacy. So they understand, if I'm joining Facebook, this is how Facebook works. If I'm joining Twitter, for me to get value for my tweets, I should follow people who put out quality information. If I'm joining TikTok, this is how I process. When I see the For You page, when I see all these videos, this is how I have to think about my work on the internet, because people will get to onto the internet because they are looking for information. Now, on this other side, most of us are looking for the eyeballs, especially the politicians, the marketers. They are looking for eyeballs. They are trying to influence opinions online. They are trying to sell their goods and products. They are trying to smear other people. They are trying to run campaigns online. So as they do that, then we have to get that balance by teaching people that this is how it operates, the internet operates, and then teaching other people on this other side that once you are online, remember there is false information that is circulating, and this is how you can detect influence operations. This is how you can spot false information, and this is what you need. So doing that using open source tools would really help people understand the environment in which they are operating. But given the history, when books were published, false information started getting into publications. When the internet came, false information, like I remember the email chains, where you will be told, send this to 8 people and then this is going to happen. When the internet came, a lot of web pages were open, just dedicated to conspiracy theories. When video became king, YouTube there's a lot of false information on YouTube, on TikTok. So the merchants of false information, if I would use that term, would continue trying to monetize or try to put out the content to disinform or disempower a lot of people. But what needs to be done is we have to find a balance where fact checkers, the community, and a lot of people just think about how they use the technology to get information. So as soon as they are in a position to know that this is how I can sift the fact from fiction, then it will be much easier for them to know what's true and what's not, and it will make it difficult, not foolproof, but difficult for them to be fooled online.
Right. And
Yes.
Would there be any social media platforms that are more trusted than others, or on the other hand, and some social media platforms that are more exposed to information pollution, more exposed than others?
The digital noise on open social media platforms. So if I'm thinking Facebook, I'm thinking Twitter, YouTube to an extent, there's a lot of digital noise over there. So it's very, you see what's correct and what's incorrect competing on that platform. And then the issue of trust comes in, because the way you use social media also determines what value you get. So who, for example, do you follow? Who are your friends? What kind of content do you read on social media, or what kind of content do you click on? And then lastly is the kind of content that you also put out. So that makes the open platforms like open season for misinformation and also for accurate information. And if it's incendiary, if it's hurtful, we've heard from whistleblowers of the different social media platforms who say that engagement goes with incendiary content, hurtful content, and something that is negative online. So we see that, but does it mean that if it's open, it can be trusted? No. Does it mean like the dark social platforms like Telegram and WhatsApp? I think, and this is totally subjective, that I can conclude with a certain layer of confidence about the vulnerability or the susceptibility of WhatsApp to be a conduit of false information. And I make that from the fact that on WhatsApp, chances are that anyone sending you information, you most likely have their number, or you are in a group, or there is a peerage in there that you guys know each other. So there's the barriers of skepticism are broken down, and there is a sense of trust because you probably have the number on your phone, or your friend has the number because they added you to a group. So information on WhatsApp could travel unchecked, given the kind of people who are sharing. So if I'm sharing with my family, or if I'm sharing with my friends, I'll just do a forward, and they will forward to the next person and to the next person. Because sometimes it's because we really want to share information because we do not know whether it's true or not. So if it's about, and we saw this a lot during COVID, whereas people were just sharing information to keep you safe. So they will tell you, try this ivermectin, it works against COVID, or try this concoction. So, and a lot of people will keep forwarding. We see it a lot with investment scams, where people just share investment scams in the hope that somebody in their family is gonna make money out of this deal. Whether it's too good to be true, they do not assess that. So with WhatsApp, I think there's still something that needs to be done, and we continue experimenting how to be much more effective without flouting the data protection laws in the different countries and the privacy needs imposed by the platform and all these other things. So it's still work in progress, but I think it's given the nature of how it operates, it's still very, very vulnerable.
Thank you. We've been talking a little bit in the previous sessions about artificial intelligence, AI. And I also wanted to ask you, do you think that we must become more vigilant in this day and age when we start to have AI around us as an everyday thing?
Yeah, and let me give you just a little story. 2019, we had fact-checked the 2017 elections. We'd seen some videos.
The 2017 in Kenya.
In Kenya, yes. And the elections were, sorry. The elections were, during the elections, the kind of misinformation that was circulating, what was new was that news bulletins were being edited in a way where the clip would remain authentic, and they would take, say, a CNN broadcast and edit the voiceover to say that the international community had endorsed candidate A or B, or diplomats in Kenya had endorsed candidate C or D. So things like those. And it was very difficult because most Kenyans do not watch CNN or BBC. So only the people in urban areas would have access to those videos. And then when they share, the potential of them being believed as true was very high. And at around 2019, there was a revelation. So a lot of people started talking about deep fakes, where AI was going to put out all these videos that will be considered true. And what happened is that I attended this conference at the Africa Investigative Journalism Conference in Johannesburg. And my job there was to go and show people how AI videos, how deepfakes are made, and how they can, how you can fact check them. And so I gave this presentation, and at the end of the day, I concluded that deepfakes are not the danger, because the people who put out false information do not have the patience and the strategic thinking, the strategic mindset of what kind of deepfake to make. And they also do not have the patience of what kind of deepfake to make to influence people in a certain way. They want quick fix because they know at the end of the day, you will be found out if you're putting out false information. So for them, it's the speed and volume of misinformation that they put out to pollute the public debate. That's what was much more important to them. But for me, the argument I made, and which I keep recalibrating, especially given the kind of AI tools that are coming out right now, is that we shouldn't look at AI as one thing that would, say, accelerate the kind of false information that goes out. So yeah, any technology that comes out will be used for good or bad. But how can we make AI much more effective, for example, to reduce the circulation of false information on the platforms, even to spot the kind of false information on platforms? It's not just the algorithmic intervention that we get from the social media platforms to de-amplify some of these things. There's also the part where as users or as fact checkers or the people who fight false information, how do we then deploy AI in a proactive manner to do that. So that's the conversation. The altruistic goals of AI for me, where we think of AI doing fact checking for us, that's still a dream that we need to work on. It's not something that we're gonna get in the next few days. And I saw the Stanford 2023 report on AI. It also gave the same we need human intervention when you're trying to fact check using AI, but the best case scenario would be to use AI to prime AI to amplify media literacy. Sorry, Jorel.
That's all right. It's all right. It's all right. I think it's also very interesting.
Yes.
Could you share some of your biggest results when it comes to water-related information pollution? Question mark.
Yeah, on water in Africa, there's a big problem, and I'll just illustrate this with the water data. There's a big problem, and I'll illustrate this with an example that we did some years back from South Africa. So a claim was made in a British newspaper that water in Africa isn't safe, tap water in Africa isn't safe to drink. And so it's the British, one of the popular newspapers in Britain. We see that claim and we've asked around and we find that the paper got it from a graphic in a budget airline. And the graphic said the data came from the CDC of the US. So when we asked the CDC, like, how did you measure water safety across the continent? It's a continent of 55 countries. Like, if anyone has that data, it would be like beautiful. We would be in a very good place. So CDC says the people who put out the data in the graphic citing CDC likely got that from the app. There's an app that CDC used to put out, which was called Can I Eat This? So the app gets data from, I think, the UN Human Development Index. And that's the first interaction that we had with SIWI, because the HDI doesn't actually measure water across. So we asked SIWI, and SIWI is like, it's very difficult to measure water safety across 55 countries in the different communities and conclude that water isn't safe. So we looked around for reports in Ethiopia and Nigeria, and we found that it's between 76 and 86% of tap water is safe. And so we started questioning, like, how the quota or the portion of the British population that had been misled about the quality of tap water on the continent. And when you look at that, it's not just a patriotic thing to do. It's also, you need to back whatever statistic you put out, or even if you're defending that water is safe in Africa, you can drink it. At least have data to back that up. It would be a good place. So the institution building that needs to be done is just to find out where is the data coming from. That's the big deal for us. Make whatever claim you make, but back it up with credible, recent data. And then we will have a decent conversation.
So we're back to that core message of the importance of reliable data, the statistics, and if we don't have that, anyone can basically make any claim because no one can really verify it or counter it. Yeah. Alphonce, our time is running out. I'd suggest if you can just type in the contact details for Africa Check as well. Because as I know, you do journalist training as well, so that could be of interest. And if people would like to get in touch somehow, thank you very much, all the speakers of the day, for joining us. Thank you for all of you who have listened in. It's a pleasure to have you in our workshops and to see that the chat is so lively and full of comments and questions. I really enjoy that.